Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be covering another user-submitted story. This time, if you want to read the original, it's on the official website. It's called Strange Aliens in My Bedroom. And I guess that's all I really need to say about what it's about. It's about aliens in this person's bedroom.
I was going to say, as opposed to normal aliens in my bedroom?
Well, my in-laws. No, but that said, before we jump into this, I shout this out because honestly, your stories is our content. This is how we are able to do like 3 of these a week. So it really does matter to get your submissions. If you have an effed up story of your own and you'd like to get it on the website and into a podcast, go to the official site, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to the menu, go to submissions, fill out the form, hit submit. I'll get it on the website and we'll get it into a podcast. And the great thing about user submitted stories is that generally nobody's ever heard them before. It's part of what makes it so interesting for me to get them, and I think that's part of what's so interesting for all of you listeners is that you haven't heard these stories before. So if you have a story, get that into me, and we'll share it around the online campfire. And anyway, so this story is going to be aliens in this person's bedroom. And I keep saying this person, I need to introduce them. The person who submitted the story is Roberto Tirado. He submitted this very recently, actually, January 12th, 2016, one of our newer submissions. So with that said, let's hop into it. So this story took place in 1994. At this time, Roberto was around 22 years old. And he said, as a teenager, he was the typical detached loner that hated people. The reality TV genre was just starting, and while watching one of those shows, he was amazed to find that he could relate to one of the participants. And that person was very positive, and they impressed Roberto as being very cool. And as a loner, he didn't want to be friends with anybody, but here on the TV, surprisingly, was this person that he, for some reason, wanted to be friends with. I guess he felt some kind of a connection with this guy. And by the end of the reality show season, that person on the show died in real life, which really angered and annoyed Roberto. And he was frustrated that such a cool person in his eyes, who was living such a positive, cool life, could meet their death so early. So what he did was he mourned the person. And he did this by looking up at the night sky for 2 or 3 consecutive nights. And he quietly lamented and cursed the unfairness of that person's fate by sending his thoughts to whoever was listening up in the heavens. And he remembers asking them, whoever these people are, or things, to show him why things have to be fucked up like this. And he said when he was doing this, he wasn't specifically focusing on communicating with God or angels or any such religion or specific entities, but he was basically intending to address the spiritual thought or controls of the universe. And that is the best way that he can describe who he was trying to contact. So I guess the powers that be. And a couple of weeks after he stopped mourning, he noticed that he would suddenly sit up in bed, fully awake, right in the middle of his sleep. And this happened randomly for a few more weeks, and each time he was a bit annoyed and curious as to why this was happening. And he had never had this happen to him before. It was entirely new, and since it was the middle of the night, he just brushed it off and went back to sleep. But then one night, he suddenly sat up again, but this time he noticed that two figures were at the foot of his bed, and their silhouette was backlit from behind. And originally he thought that he was looking at his younger brother and sister who had gotten into his room for some reason, but then he quickly realized that that's not what he was seeing. He said his siblings had never before gotten into his room while he was asleep or awake. And I guess that's, or else, right? And Roberto's sudden reaction was to feel anger, and just as he was about to yell at what he thought was his siblings for coming into his room, he suddenly noticed two very odd things. And first he wanted to explain that his sister is skinny and shorter than his brother, who is taller of the two and also fat. Very colorful way to put it. The two backlit figures that he was looking at were also fat and skinny, but the skinny one was taller than the fat one. And they had two thin tubes, and this is one of the aspects of his story I found interesting, was how he described these beings. He said that they were both fat. Okay, they had these thin tubes that were coming out of their heads, and when he realized that they weren't his siblings, his anger quickly changed to confusion, then curiosity, and he was interested in observing as best he could the strange things that were standing right there in front of him. And he noticed that it was absolutely quiet except for a very low droning sound. And he said he lives between two freeways, so you can hear cars driving by day and night, but this was different. And there was also a bright, pure, cold white light that seemed to be shining into his room from just above his window. The two silhouetted figures looked like the typical alien greys, but they didn't look exactly alike. The taller, skinny one was about 5 feet tall and had a large, triangular-shaped head with pointy, as he put it, Leonard Nimoy Spock-style ears that were about 5 inches long. He had a pair of tubes that ended in a flat circle coming out of each corner of his triangular head that reached down to the sides of his abdomen. And he seemed to be the one in charge. The shorter, fat one was about 4 feet tall and had a smaller, rounded head, longer pointed ears, which he elaborated to say maybe 10 to 12 inches long, and a shorter pair of tubes coming out of the head that only reached down to his cheeks. Roberto was amused by what he was seeing, and the thought of talking to them entered his head. But weirdly, that thought was interrupted by telepathy between him and the aliens. He could hear them communicating with one another. And he said they were both facing him, but the fat one gestured toward him, like towards Roberto, to alert the skinny one, I guess, that he was awake, that he was aware of what was going on. And the fat one asked the skinny one if he can take this guy and eat him. And which must have been terrifying, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
And the skinny one turned as if he was annoyed with the fat one's question, like, "Oh, this again, right?"
Yeah.
Make no wonder you're so fat.
Complaining about being fat, Jerry. Keep eating all of our experiments.
Yeah, so he's annoyed with this guy, and he turns and looks to him, and he answered him, "No, someone would miss him." And at that moment, Roberto wanted to ask him something, but the skinny one raised his hand, which he said had no fingers, just a thumb, and it looked as if he was wearing a mitten. I mean, that's the way he described his hand. And he immediately, as the alien raised his hand, Roberto said he immediately felt a pressure at the base of his neck. And he calmly answered, "Oh, okay." And it almost sounds like a daze, like he understood. Maybe he was hypnotized to a degree. And he said he quickly fell back into his bed asleep. And the whole episode, he said, lasted less than 10 seconds. But, he's never had a repeat of that experience since. And he's also never repeated any mental communications with the universe again. So, Ryan, your thoughts?
Well, I first off, I love stories like this because they illustrate a level of bizarreness that we don't come to associate with the extraterrestrial phenomenon anymore. Once upon a time in the early years, there was all kinds of high strangeness, as we call it today, that would be associated with either UFO sightings or sightings of beings coming from, what looked to be crafts. All kind, and I mean, I've heard some really bizarre ones, from people here, seen lights in the sky and heard things in their house to find, these strange handprints all over the inside of their door in peanut butter. I mean, it's this kind of strangeness, this kind of, you can't, it makes no sense. You wake up in the middle of the night, there's these two, movie-like gray aliens standing there, except one is tall and skinny and the other one's short and fat, with strange tubes sticking out of their head. And even to the description of the hands, that's a new one for me. I've never heard of the fingerless mittens with a thumb.
Well, see, that's what I liked about it. And you make a good point in that way back when we'd hear these stories, they were really, like, a lot of them were very different and very strange. Like, now I find most stories, that are similar, and on one hand you could say, well, they're similar because people are encountering the same beings, but there's also, I guess, some truth in the notion that because it's so popular, a certain look and story is so popular that some people who don't necessarily have experiences adopt, a similar, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I also think that what is also a strong possibility for the kind of homogenization of these stories over the years, it seems like all the weirdness kind of got bleeded out, and it stuck to, the phenomenon became associated with a very select type of encounter, and anything outside of that was summarily dismissed. But I think a strong argument for that too is also the misinformation campaign theory, that there are certain individuals or groups of individuals or whole organizations, either singular or plural, who may be, working full time to muddy the waters with these stories. So, we get kind of a whitewashed version of, what is actually a global phenomenon where, we get these stories from all over the world, English speaking countries and otherwise. But, on the big world scale, we see that a lot of these stories are very similar. Now, is that because, it's the same beings doing the same things over and over? Well, maybe. But also, it could be that these are like the false kinds of situations. And, they're being played up to kind of muddy the waters for the real stories. And maybe this is an example of what the real stories are like. There's a kind of a terrifying aspect where, this dopey little alien creature with tubes sticking out of its head is like, so, I'm pretty hungry. Can we eat them now? That's, on one side is comical, is like a cartoon. On the other side, I'd be curious too, but at that point, I'd be fucking terrified. Like, here these things can just come and go in and out of my room as they please, and they like eating people. That's a disheartening kind of bit of information. You never feel comfortable in my room again, kind of a thing. I don't know, I'd buy a casket and lock it on the inside or something, Well,
it doesn't help that the fat alien wasn't exactly pictured in the brightest light. This dopey one kind of not in charge. Well, I'm hungry. Can we eat them?
It's almost lunchtime, we've been abducting people all night. Can we eat this one? And the other one his only answer is no, somebody would miss him.
Yeah, but it's almost like a face palm was implied, right? It's like, oh, damn it, Roger. You fat bastard. Shut up.
Easy there, Stan.
Yeah. Well, oddly enough, because I watch American Dad like all the time, right? And when you said, the strange stories, like when someone would wake up and there was peanut butter all over the door, and all I could think about was the episode where Roger's like pancreas or something like that, which was alive, got out, and he had to like use peanut butter traps to try and catch it. It's like, maybe that's a thing, man. It's not necessarily a fictional thing. There's a little bit of truth in every story you hear. Perhaps perhaps the guy, what was his name? Is it Seth? Seth the
MacFarlane.
MacFarlane, yeah. Perhaps he was the one that had the alien with the peanut butter at his house. He's like, well, it terrified me, but fuck it. I'm making a character. I'm going to name him Roger, and he's going to lay peanut butter traps.
Well, that story actually came from somebody here in the city who had heard strange sounds, looked out their window, seen a craft lighting up their entire backyard, and then they heard noises, and they lived alone. They heard noises in their downstairs area of the house. Went down and found, like the kitchen practically trashed, and these strange handprints all over the inside of the door that he claims were done in peanut butter. And the only reason I bring the story up is just illustrates the level of strangeness that some of these stories are, seem to exhibit. It's kind of akin to, the kinds of events that we started to see after the Skinwalker ranch incidents became known. Good
old Skinwalker.
Good old Skinwalker always comes back. All roads lead back to Skinwalker.
That place is FUBAR.
It is, and I think it's that its reputation for being FUBAR is quite telling.
Why can't they invite us there? I'd like to go visit.
Well, I think is probably a liability issue. We go on the ranch and the Skinwalker eats us because it's hungry, and its fat alien friend is there with him. Then
no, he wouldn't be able to get through the tunnel. Remember the tunnel that opened up and the shadow guy got out of it? The fat alien would be like, I'm not walking out there. You bastards. No, teleport me.
That's why we invented spaceships.
Exactly.
It illustrates a larger or greater reality to these situations. We tend to and here's another, an alternate kind of an angle that recently is really caught a lot of traction in my mind. Of course, I read a lot of this stuff constantly, just on my own time. But the idea that extraterrestrials are not necessarily involved, that these are implanted memories, and that the perpetrators are actually human beings performing experiments, but at the same time they're utilizing extraterrestrial technology to do these things. So it seems so mysterious and mystical because it seems beyond the ability of a man. And then they just implant some ridiculous memory in your head about what occurred, and replace the memory of two soldiers or two scientists or two agents, replace that with two Hollywood caricatures of extraterrestrials.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I've actually read some stories recently about people who have woken up and they can't remember anything about who they were, anything about themselves. They didn't have a stroke. There's no brain damage. They didn't have an accident, but they have all these memories that aren't theirs, right? It's like they're a different person. They don't know how they got there. Where they think they work is different. Everything is just swapped. It's like taking one person's brain and plopping it into somebody else's body. And
I've seen this now in the stories that I read that were similar to this. I believe this was the story I read was a woman, and she claimed that she was from a parallel reality.
Oh, I read that too.
The place where she worked was where it was, and she still worked there.
But the department was moved.
Yes, exactly. And she wasn't with her husband anymore. She was, still with somebody who, in her memories, is an ex-boyfriend, from way in her past. And she comes to find that, she's still with this person, and she apparently has never met her husband that she remembers being with for several years or something like that.
What makes that so interesting is it's right on that, the parallel universe idea, right? I mean, that's something I got to tell you, man, when it comes to parallel universes and time slips and warps, and I love that stuff, but it's so hard to find good stories on it.
Yes.
Maybe we should look into that more. I did get a suggestion from somebody recently to, if we could do more stuff on time slips and that kind of thing. And honestly, I'd love to. I love that stuff. I just find it hard to find really, really good solid stories on it. But perhaps we should look.
It's called the Mandela theory. Because years ago there was a very large group of people who were convinced that Nelson Mandela had been dead for years, only to come to the realization that he wasn't dead, that he was still alive and kicking and doing doing his thing, doing his human rights thing. And that's the first real instance that I can remember coming across this kind of a story. And I do believe that the phenomenon is called the Mandela phenomenon or something like that. And I mean, this goes into the whole situation with the Berenstain Bears and
we got to cover that too, man.
So it's definitely one to of course we've strayed off topic a little bit like we usually do, but again, it's one of these things where when we're faced with these kinds of stories, I mean, we always just as the way we do the show, we talk about the story and take it at face value for the purposes of the conversation, because it just, we could sit here and pick every story apart. There's more than enough people out there already on the internet doing that kind of shit. People send us their stories, presumably in some cases, to get it off their chest, because some of this stuff is just too weird for somebody to deal with on their own. And, if you have trouble assimilating it into your life, sometimes it's nice to be able to get it out to a greater audience. And I think it's important because, I've lost count on the number of times now that we've had people make comments like, "Oh my God, that's what happened to me."
Oh, all the time.
Yeah,
and the thing is that it's therapeutic, I would think, for some of the people dealing with it. But I also think that there's lots of people who share similar experiences, and it's hard. Like, it would be hard to deal with something like that, and this kind of brings people together, and it gives them a level of comfort that they wouldn't have otherwise, and even more than that, as a group. Let's face it. If you're listening to this show, you're interested in the paranormal, right? And all of us people who are interested in, this is a topic, a broad topic, but a topic that really doesn't have any answers. We discuss it because there is no scientific reason. That's what makes it interesting, is that it's a mystery, and we're all trying as a big group to solve it. We interact in comments. We search out similar stories. We compare notes. That's what we are. We're one giant group of people that are trying to figure these things out because it's interesting, because maybe it's important to you, maybe you have an experience. So whatever the case is, it's something that draws us all in, and you can't just just like we can't prove it's true, most of the time you can't prove it's false either. It's no good to go into this with a negative mindset and just be like, well, there's no proof it exists, so it don't. Right? That's just is the wrong way to look at it. That'd be like looking at, okay, well, there's no cure for cancer because we don't know one exists, so therefore one doesn't. Right? You can't go in there like that.
We should never look.
Right.
We shouldn't spend any money on research for it because it obviously doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah. Like all ingenious, ideas, solutions, and everything comes from having the idea that there is an answer to something, and then it requires hard work, a lot of hard work and time to do it. But that's what it's all about, right? And if it's something you're interested in, then you're going to put the time in. And frankly, for me, while I'm looking for answers, obviously, I think a big part of the fun is not knowing, right? It's just like how people say, it's not knowing that scares people. And I don't know what it is about us people that like being scared or whatever, but there is truth to that. For me, like I like horror movies, right? And I watch horror movies, but truthfully, more than that is I watch documentaries and listen to podcasts like what we do, because when I almost need it to be real to feel anything anymore. Right, I'm so desensitized by, Hollywood and things of that nature, and seeing the same storylines, the same this, same that. Like, I need it to be weird. I need it, the weirder the better. I need it to be really out there. I need it to be to feel like it's real. That's what I need to feel with this stuff. And
I think more than just that, even, well, that's an important thing, and I very much share your sentiment there that, even with paranormal stories, it's like you're always chasing the dragon. You're looking for the weirdest and the strangest tales, because you kind of get used to the okay, you got abducted by an alien, and okay, they inserted a probe through his belly button, and
no, that's not where it goes.
That's not where it goes. Well, sometimes it does. I think the important part.
The
important part, I think, is that we have a dialogue about this kind of stuff, because the truth of the matter is that people really believe that they've had these situations happen to them. I'm not going to sit here and state that it's a matter of fact that all these people have had all these things. I mean, we can't know that. It's a story. It's an anecdote. We have to go off of what our fellow human is saying. But we have the strange double standard in our society where a fellow human being's story about who committed the murder is good enough to put somebody away for life. But then somebody comes out and says, oh my God, I had these weird entities in my bedroom. One was talking about eating me, and then I fell asleep and they fell back asleep and they were gone. That's a terrifying incident. Just waking up and having two strange human beings standing in your bedroom would be a terrifying situation. To wake up and have two non-human entities physically standing in your bedroom, and obviously this person was able to recount with enough detail the situation that happened to them, that they certainly believe it was real. They don't, this is not the product of a fever dream or some kind of substance-induced hallucination, that this person really believes in what they're saying. And if that's the case, then, I think at least some of us have to say, well, that's good enough for me. Let's hear what you got to say, and let's talk about it, because, if we don't have a dialogue about this stuff now, and in 50 years, something shows up in the sky and is plastered all over the news, and all of a sudden, the UFO phenomenon, the extraterrestrial phenomenon, it becomes a real thing, then we're going to be starting at ground zero with the conversation, when we probably don't have time to start at ground zero. I think that at the very least, it's a good intellectual exercise for us to talk about this stuff now and what the implications are. The seriousness of these events have gone to the point where, there's certain organizations that, have nuclear physicists and former NASA scientists that work, to go through these reports. We have individuals like Robert Bigelow who take it seriously enough that, he literally bought the ranch, and here's a guy whose job is, his job is space. So if anybody is going to be taking this stuff seriously, it'd be the guy who's looking to make get an edge against the competition by saying, if I could discover one truth about these UFOs, that puts me above my competition as, in the aerospace industry. So, these kinds of stories, while bizarre and way out in left field, especially in terms of this particular story, where that's not your usual extraterrestrial contact tale. Everything from it's all familiar, but there's certain key things that are different. And, I think that if we don't take the time now to discuss these things and at least get a dialogue going about it, I think that could come back and really bite us in the ass in the future.
Well, the way to look at it is like this. You and I obviously have an interest in it. We do open a dialogue. We take everything at face value. And in a world where scientists aren't looking at it that way, police aren't nobody in society generally, nobody really accepts that. It's a fictional thing. Wouldn't you say that's generally how people would look at it? Is it?
Definitely. It's looked at as being a form of faux reality entertainment.
Right. So in a world where this is considered entertainment and nobody believes it, I mean, who are you going to call? Effed up stories, right? We're ready to believe you. And please don't sue us for that, Ghostbusters. We love your movies. So it's true, right? I mean, we need platforms like this. We really do. If we weren't doing it, I mean, there's already other people doing it, but you know, if mainstream groups aren't gonna do it, we have to do it, right? Just you and me, the people that watch our show, the people that watch this stuff, because it needs to be looked at. But you know, secretly, or you know, I believe behind the curtains, like we know about Robert Bigelow, but I also believe that you know, we know this too, like the government and the military. I mean, they're involved. It's just not it's not put out there for everybody to see, right?
Yes.
But
I guess that's an important distinction. It's not that there's no dialogue going on about this. There's no public discourse, you know. And I think this is the age of crowdsourcing. And you know, what a great idea, you know, to tackle problems like these by crowdsourcing it, by getting as many people, you know, we get a couple of thousand people in on it and everybody discuss it. And I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the medium that we are currently using.
Wouldn't it be cool if we could get that? Yeah, wouldn't it be cool if we could get like a group of people, you know, people that watch our show who are into this stuff, that you know, are perhaps into it deep like us, and we could all go out as a group and like investigate stuff and try it. I wish that were possible if I wasn't in the middle of nowhere. I'd totally love to meet up with some of you guys.
That's what we're doing here in the digital arena.
Yeah, but man, imagine the stories we'd get. See, Ryan and I used to do this kind of thing. Go out and poke and prod around, and you know, we got some stories from it. It's always lots of fun. I really miss those days.
Me too.
Yeah. Getting old sucks, man. You know. But, you know, on that note, any of you guys out there, if you so feel inclined, if you'd like to pay for Ryan and I to go and research some stuff, you know, I'd be very willing to fly anywhere and
on somebody else's dime.
On someone else's dime, man. I'd go as far as, well, to a limit. I mean, I wouldn't be like the guy that gets lowered into that well. Remember the Mel's Hole story where,
yep,
you know, we don't know how far it goes, and they put, I can't remember if they put someone, I know they put like a dog or a something.
Well, they were going to lower this guy down there, but at the last minute, I think somebody was like, "You're crazy! You can't do that. Let's lower the sheep down." Right. And then they pulled it up, and all that fucking weirdness with the sheep.
Oh, we got to cover that story too, man. All right, so I think we've exhausted this topic because I'm kind of hopping all over the place here. But
well, it's not exhaustive, but I you know, as far as the UFO phenomenon goes, I could literally talk for hours about it. But I'm more so referring to Roberto's story. So essentially, to sum up, he had a very strange experience, and it's you know, it's not necessarily the norm. But it's very important that we all talk about this because it certainly isn't happening in mainstream media. You know, we should discuss it. You know, discuss it in the comments. Tell us what you think. And if you have an effed up story and you'd like to get it, well, hell, I don't even care if you want to give it. Even if you don't, do it anyway. Do it for me. Make me feel good. Do it anonymously.
Do it and let the English see you do it. I think that's the words of Braveheart. So do it. Yeah, I'm not going to try the accent. Okay, so if you have an effed up story, please submit that to us at the official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to the menu, to submissions, fill out the form, hit submit. I'll get it onto the website. We will get it into a podcast. and we will have more of these very lengthy conversations. And apparently you guys like that. I'm thinking about I'm all over the place, but people watch. I've had a couple drinks. I don't know if you guys can notice that or not. Anyway, with that said, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will be doing another one shortly. I hope you enjoy that as well.
Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Good night.
Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode. Get that into me, and we'll share it around. Share it around the online campfire. And anyway, so this story is going to be aliens in this person's bedroom. And I keep saying this person. I need to introduce them. The person who submitted the story is Roberto Tirado. He submitted this very recently, actually, January 12th, 2016. One of our newer submissions. So, with that said, let's hop into it. So, this story took place in 1994. At this time, Roberto was around 22 years old. And he said, as a teenager, he was the typical detached loner that hated people. The reality TV genre was just starting, and while watching one of those shows, he was amazed to find that he could relate to one of the participants. And that person was very positive, and they impressed Roberto as being very cool. And as a loner, he didn't want to be friends with anybody, but here on the TV, surprisingly, was this person that he, for some reason, wanted to be friends with. I guess he felt some kind of a connection with this guy. And by the end of the reality show season, that person on the show died in real life, which really angered and annoyed Roberto, and he was frustrated that such a cool person in his eyes, who was living such a positive, cool life, could meet their death so early. So what he did was he mourned the person, and he did this by looking up at the night sky for 2 or 3 consecutive nights, and he quietly lamented and cursed the unfairness of that person's fate by sending his thoughts to whoever was listening up in the heavens. And he remembers asking them, whoever these people are, or things, to show him why things have to be fucked up like this. And he said when he was doing this, he wasn't specifically focusing on communicating with God or angels or any such religion or specific entities, but he was basically intending to address the spiritual thought or controls of the universe. And that is the best way that he can describe who he was trying to contact. So I guess the powers that be. And a couple of weeks after he stopped mourning, he noticed that he would suddenly sit up in bed, fully awake, right in the middle of his sleep. And this happened randomly for a few more weeks, and each time he was a bit annoyed and curious as to why this was happening. And he had never had this happen to him before. It was entirely new, And since it was the middle of the night, he just brushed it off and went back to sleep. But then one night, he suddenly sat up again, but this time of effed up stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be covering another user-submitted story. This time, if you want to read the original, it's on the official website. It's called Strange Aliens in My Bedroom. And I guess that's all I really need to say about what it's about. It's about aliens in this person's bedroom.
I was going to say, as opposed to normal aliens in my bedroom?
Well, my in-laws. No, but that said, before we jump into this, I shout this out because honestly, your stories is our content. This is how we are able to do like 3 of these a week. So it really does matter to get your submissions. If you have an effed up story of your own and you'd like to get it on the website and into a podcast, go to the official site, which is effedupstories.com. That's effedupstories.com. Go to the menu, go to submissions, fill out the form, hit submit. I'll get it on the website and we'll get it into a podcast. And the great thing about user submitted stories is that generally nobody's ever heard them before. It's part of what makes it so interesting for me to get them, and I think that's part of what's so interesting for all of you listeners is that you haven't heard these stories before. So if you have a story, he noticed that 2 figures were at the foot of his bed, and their silhouette was backlit from behind. And originally he thought that he was looking at his younger brother and sister who had gotten into his room for some reason. But then he quickly realized that that's not what he was seeing. He said his siblings had never before gotten into his room while he was asleep or awake. And I guess that's, or else, right? And Roberto's sudden reaction was to feel anger. And just as he was about to yell at what he thought was his siblings for coming into his room, he suddenly noticed 2 very odd things. And first he wanted to explain that his sister is skinny and shorter than his brother, who is taller of the 2 and also fat. Very colorful way to put it. The 2 backlit figures that he was looking at were also fat and skinny, but the skinny one was taller than the fat one. And they had 2 thin tubes, and this is one of the aspects of his story I found interesting, was how he described these beings. He said that they were both fat. Okay, they had these thin tubes that were coming out of their heads, and when he realized that they weren't his siblings, his anger quickly